There's questions about whether or not these children will keep going to school, how they'll focus in school, and what the long-term outcomes for them will be.
This week's episode of EWA Radio is sponsored by EdChoice. EWA retains our editorial control over programming and content. This is EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. This week, the Trump administration announced its plans to formally dismantle DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, an Obama-era program that allowed some young, undocumented immigrants to live and work in the U.S. without fear of being deported. Now, while this move won't take effect for at least 6 months, and Congress has a window to revise the immigration law, it could potentially impact some 800,000 young adults who were brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. To help us understand what Trump's decision means, we have 2 reporters joining us today. Kathy Mangan of the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Corey Mitchell of Education Week. Corey, we're glad you could be here as well.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Katie, I want to start with you. Let's talk a little bit about what DACA is and what DACA isn't. What do people have to demonstrate in order to qualify?
Yeah, in order to qualify for DACA, undocumented students have to meet very strict criteria, including the fact that they have to have come to the United States before they were 16, and they have to have lived continuously in this country for a certain number of years. It's open to a number of undocumented people who at this point are between the ages of about 16 and their mid-30s, with most of them in their 20s. And what it does is it offers them 2-year renewable permits to allow them to work in this country. And in many cases, it also offers them the opportunity to get lower in-state tuition, which is very important for students because undocumented students are not eligible for financial aid. What it doesn't offer is a path to citizenship. It's really just a 2-year authorization allowing students to work and study here, but with no permanent path to citizenship.
In a way, it was sort of a stopgap measure, right, after the so-called DREAM Act failed to pass through Congress, which would have actually been a path to citizenship. So this was something that the Obama administration came up with to sort of put a Band-Aid on the issue.
Yes, that's right. Ever since 2001, Congress has been bringing up and voting down variations of the DREAM Act. Of course, there's another one up this year that many people are hopeful will pass, but because it had not passed, and President Obama felt it wasn't fair to punish young people for the errors that their parents had made or the illegal acts that their parents had made by bringing them here, he went ahead and issued DACA as an executive action, which meant that he didn't have to get congressional approval for that.
Even early in his campaign, President Trump had promised to end DACA and said he would do it as soon as he was elected. Obviously, he's been in office about 8 months now. So why was this the time to tackle it?
The reason this action happened on September 5th was that was the deadline that a group of attorneys general from conservative states, led by Texas, had set for the president to act to rescind DACA. They were getting very impatient, as a number of hardliners on immigration were, that DACA had not been rescinded, and basically threatened to sue. They said that if you haven't rescinded DACA by September 5th, we're going to sue. And President Trump waited until that final day to announce that he was, in fact, going to end the program.
We should point out that not all attorneys general want to get rid of DACA. What are some of the actions that are being threatened on the other side of the coin?
Well, just today, at least 3 attorneys general announced that they would be filing lawsuits over Trump's decision to rescind DACA. New York, Washington, and California were among the first to chime in, but many people expect the other states to follow suit.
Katie, I imagine your inbox is filling up with responses to the Trump administration's decision. What's been the reaction of the higher education community?
Yeah, I think there's just an outpouring of support and sympathy for people who are in this situation. We're getting just flooded with emails from college presidents, essentially assuring their DACA students that we have your back. We're going to do everything we can for you. We have pro bono counseling, legal services, just sort of whatever students might need. But it's kind of unclear at this point what they can do. I think one of the other issues, too, is that a number of colleges and universities employ DACA students. And when those students lose their work authorization, they may be in a position where they're expected to lay them off. And it's just unclear what they'll do at that point.
At the same time that this has been unfolding, there's also been some parallel reporting on how shifts in U.S. policy have hurt international student enrollment at a number of colleges and universities that depend on those full freight tuitions. Those kids pay full price and offset some of the scholarship costs for kids who can't afford to go. Any sense about how DACA might affect those numbers?
I think it probably, this latest action will probably just add to the perception that a lot of people around the world have that the United States is just not particularly welcoming to people from other countries. And so I think, if anything, it's going to make it even harder to recruit foreign students.
So for the students who get the DACA permits to go to school and to work, what is it going to mean to them that they can no longer earn their own living?
In the short term, a lot of these students rely on part-time jobs that they piece together to be able to afford college tuition. As undocumented students are not eligible for financial aid, their families generally don't have a lot of money. And so they really have to be able to count on these jobs. And if they're forced to quit or if they're laid off, many of them just won't be able to afford to stay in school.
We're talking about the Trump administration's decision to dismantle DACA. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and take a moment to leave a rating. Your support and feedback will help us grow. Corey Mitchell, Education Week, I'd like to turn to you now and talk a little bit about how DACA is going to impact the K-12 education community. I think there may be a misconception out there that this really is only potentially going to hurt students of college age or young people who may have been thinking about entering the military or the workforce. But as you've reported, that's really not the case, is it?
No. Since the law was enacted, there have been 250,000 students who have aged into DACA, and there are estimates that there are thousands of teachers who are DACA protected who are working in the nation's classrooms.
And there, you mentioned something in your reporting that I didn't really think about, and that is, of course, that there are also now DACA permit recipients who are parents themselves.
Yes, and the thought that their children are in school, they don't know how long their parents will be able to remain in the country. I mean, there's questions about whether or not these children will keep going to school, how they'll focus in school, and what the long-term outcomes for them will be.
What's been the reaction that you've seen from different spheres of the education community? I mean, I have noticed that it seems to be bringing together some people who don't normally agree on things. I'm thinking of, for example, the NEA and the Education Trust have both come out to decry this move by the administration.
Yeah, there's been widespread outrage and empathy. This seems to be a one unifying issue that has come up in education. I was talking to a Harvard University professor earlier today who studies DACA recipients, and he says that that this move is marshaled support behind this, and this may be the one thing that propels pushes Congress to actually reach some type of legislative solution. Whether that happens remains to be seen.
You've reported on DACA quite a bit over the years, and I'm sure you've met some interesting people who are recipients of the permits. Tell me about a few of them.
Well, I met Jose, a teacher, middle school math teacher out in California, just like President Trump, a graduate of the Wharton School, but he decided to pursue a career in teaching, and now he's one of those folks who doesn't know what's going to happen. Of course, he has at least 2 years remaining in this country, but he's dedicated his life to his students in the South Central community. What does he do now as he looks to perhaps transition if this country, the Congress can't figure out a solution? I also met Alex, a teacher down in the Houston area, another Ivy League grad who's facing questions after going into the classroom through a Teach for America program that actively recruits DACA protected teachers. That organization is, like I said, going out and look for these people to connect with some of these students who may be undocumented or have undocumented parents to inspire and share their stories. So
there's an important data piece to the story, of course. And, I can remember back in 2012, there were concerns expressed that if Republican nominee Mitt Romney had defeated President Obama in his reelection bid, that the DACA applications would be converted into something like a roster to target immigrants for deportation. What are you hearing right now about the sensitivity of that information and what the plans are? How worried should people be?
Oh, well, the Department of Homeland Security has said that they're not going to use that information to actively go out and seek people, but have said that they reserve the right to use that in cases of where national security may be an issue. So I'm sure there's some uneasiness about folks. I mean, they shared this information in good faith. And it could include information not just on them, but also on family members. So there's probably widespread concern about this.
Corey, what are a couple of story ideas for local reporters who may be covering this right now? I mean, obviously, we've got this 6-month sort of holding period to see if Congress does take action. But for local reporters who may be reporting on students of color and immigration issues, from your coverage of the beat, what advice do you have?
I definitely take a look at the folks who have filed for DACA protection, but whose paperwork hasn't been approved yet. That's a big deal. The administration said they're going to look at this on a case-by-case basis. Some of the folks working on the ground in some of these places may be able to paint a picture at what the government is actually doing with these folks. You probably also want to take a look at districts and states that have large undocumented populations, whether or not these kids are showing up to school anymore, or whether they're just giving up hope. You may also just want to reach out to some of these folks. I mean, just the basic Q&A or the basic profile. What are these folks facing now? If they're working in a classroom or if they're a parent with one or more young children in school, what are their options? What are they thinking?
Those are excellent suggestions, Corey. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Corey Mitchell is a staff writer for Education Week. He's the author of the Learning the Language blog and the co-author of the District Dossier blog. He joined us from his office in Washington, D.C. Catherine Mangan covers colleges and universities for the Chronicle of Higher Education. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We also want to thank EdChoice for their sponsorship. The EdChoice mission is to advance educational freedom and choice for all as a pathway for more successful lives and a stronger society. And that wraps up another episode of EWA Radio. If there's a story you want to know more about, drop us a line with radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education writers and improve the quality of education coverage to better inform the public. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, everyone, and thanks for listening.